Hello, and welcome to another episode of Glorious Life on Wheels. You know, I intended to air a completely different video today and had it already prepared, but based on recent developments, including Congress passing the budget resolution that they did this week, I just felt compelled to make this video instead. You know, I grew up very poor, and I'm also a senior. So both seniors and those living in poverty are experiencing financial hardship, especially seniors, hold a very special place in my heart. And I think this budget, if it goes forward and is implemented into law, is going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to be devastating. Despite what is being said, I think it's going to cause a lot of people who desperately need Medicaid to lose their medical coverage. But come on, and I will share more with you about why I think this way. My channel is not a political channel, and I don't intend to turn it into one. But I also don't live in a bubble oblivious to what's going on in society. And when things happen that I believe are going to be harmful to people I care about, or groups I care about, I really think it's incumbent on me to speak up. I'm going to present you with some facts that I have found as a result of my research, and I believe those facts support my position and say that it really is a position that comes from common sense when you evaluate the facts. I welcome your input, and I'm curious to know if you agree or disagree with the conclusions I've come to based on the facts that I've discovered. But if you're going to come in here and just say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, I don't agree, blah, 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 but you've been too lazy to really look up the facts for yourself, I'm just going to remove your comment because you're not adding anything of substance to the conversation. But if you have looked up for yourself the facts and have come to a different conclusion, I really would be interested in hearing why you came to that conclusion. I'm going to be periodically referring to my notes because there's a lot of information here to impart to you. But based on the budget resolution as it was passed, it calls for cuts of $880 billion, I believe it is. If I'm wrong, correct me. But my understanding is that $880 billion is planned to be cut from the department that oversees Medicaid. Now, it has repeatedly been said, oh, we're not going to do any cuts to Medicaid. We're not going to do any cuts to Medicaid. We're going to leave that intact. But when Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, was asked this week about cuts to Medicaid, he stated, we're only going to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse. Then at the cabinet meeting that was held this week, it was stated again there would be no cuts to Medicaid, but it was added as a caveat, except to take people off of Medicaid that shouldn't be on there. And then illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants, however you want to refer to these individuals, were named as individuals who would be taken off of Medicaid. This is really interesting because based on my research, illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants are not eligible for federal Medicaid. Now, there are some exceptions at the state level. Some states, including California, have expanded Medicaid to include children, and in 2024, some adults. However, based on my understanding, these funds are taken from state funds, not federal funds. Now, if I'm incorrect, please let me know. Now, also, there are other circumstances in which Medicaid funds can be used, and that is if someone who's undocumented receives emergency care at the hospital. However, eliminating these federal fund payments for emergency care would not come anywhere close to reaching the goal of eliminating $880 billion In response to the question, would they be making cuts to Medicaid, when Mike Johnson said they would be eliminating abuse, fraud, and waste, the inference was that a great deal of fraud was being perpetrated by recipients of Medicaid. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, let me give you some facts, shall I? Every year, the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services does an annual report. That report is called the Healthcare Fraud Control Program Annual Report. It was released for fiscal year 2023. That report was released on December 6th of 2024. You know what they found? They found, based on summaries which identify healthcare fraud, they found, according to the report, that the majority of the perpetrators identified are not recipients. In fact, that was a minuscule amount. I don't know if they even named them in this report. But according to the report, the providers are the ones perpetrating fraud. Among providers, let me tell you who they would be. They would be licensed medical professionals, such as doctors, nurse practitioners, physical therapists, durable medical equipment providers, pharmacies, ambulance companies, nursing homes, diagnostic companies, that would be labs and companies that do imaging like MRIs. Overwhelmingly, any fraud committed was committed by these individuals. And how they do it is they either overcharge for services or they charge for services or equipment they didn't even provide. I spoke with a medical professional today who's been in practice for a long time. And I was telling him about this report that I was doing. And he told me, he said, it's not patients. It's not my patients who are committing fraud. People who are committing frauds. And he said, having a private practice for a long time, he said it's companies and providers, not recipients, who are the perpetrators of fraud. This is what he said. Now, how are you going to cut the budget and take out $880 billion if it's providers? Well, you could get some of it done by finding these providers and using investigators that they have. And this is what the investigators do. They go out, they investigate these crimes or these allegations, and then they build cases which bring them to justice, get convictions, fine them, have them pay back the monies. But guess what? In the federal employees who are getting fired, guess who's getting fired? Some of the very investigators that do the investigations to find the real fraud. Not people who are doing it that are recipients, but the providers. And these are among the hatchet job that's being done on just randomly a shotgun approach to getting rid of federal employees. So maybe if you want to save money and not have so much fraud, maybe you should hire more investigators, not fire the ones that you have. I'm going to tell you how I believe that the cuts are going to be made. And I believe absolutely they're going to be made to Medicare. I'm not even going to discuss Medicare in this discussion, but Medicaid. A couple of ideas that have been bounced around Congress by many members of Congress. One of them is to put a lifetime cap on Medicaid coverage. In other words, you'd have an amount, I don't know, I'm just throwing a random amount out. Let's say $500,000. And when you reach $500,000, you can no longer receive any payments from Medicaid. Well, what if you have cancer? Do you know how expensive cancer treatment is? It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And frequently, even though you may be successfully treated, breast cancer comes back. What about if you're on dialysis? What about if you have some other major illness like heart bypass or some of these other things? One illness could wipe out your budget and you could no longer be eligible for Medicaid. You would no longer get medical coverage, even though you had previously been eligible. Another idea that's being put out there is to reduce the number of people who qualify by simply taking some people off the rolls. Let me just say this. A rose by any other name is still a rose. A cut by any other name is still a cut to Medicaid. Under the Affordable Care Act, a lot of people were added to the Medicaid rolls. The eligibility requirements were changed, so a lot of people became eligible for Medicaid and now receive medical coverage under the Affordable Care Act. If you change the rules, if you move the goalpost, you can knock a lot of people off. Now, technically, they're not going to call that a cut, but I call that a cut. You're going to knock people off who would no longer be eligible for Medicaid. Now, let me tell you some of the people who receive Medicaid. There are approximately 80 million people currently in the United States on Medicaid. Those include children with disabilities. Based on my research, approximately 50% of special needs kids receive Medicaid. It's low-income folks and now some moderate-income folks who would be bankrupted if they had major health problems. Disabled folks, seniors in nursing homes. In fact, estimates are that 5 out of 8 nursing home residents have part or all of their nursing home bills paid by Medicare. So what are we going to do now? Kick grandma and grandpa out of nursing homes? Oh my goodness. Also, in Louisiana, the state that Mike Johnson is from, if I'm not mistaken, their minimum wage is still only $7.25 an hour. How can a person on $7.25 an hour afford medical care? Even if you're 2 people earning minimum wage, how can you support a family on that and afford medical coverage unless you're on Medicaid? Right now, in Louisiana, Mike Johnson state, either 33 or 34% of the population of that state is on Medicaid. Hospitals are already hemorrhaging, or so they say. I did a video recently in which I talked about Mass General Bingham, which is going to cut, they say hundreds, but the projections are thousands of jobs if they're going to lay people off. If this $880 billion is going to be met, Medicaid is going to be cut. You can believe that. I don't care what they call it. They can call it whatever they want it, but it's going to be cuts. And you know who's going to suffer the most? Poor people, especially those in rural areas like North Carolina, Appalachia area, where they had the floods. Those are the people that are going to suffer the most, where they already have challenges in getting health care. A lot of those hospitals, I believe, will close. This is just my take on it. And you know what the Bible says, you can tell if something, a prophecy is true by seeing if it comes true. So we'll see, but I don't think they're going to be able to do this without making some major cuts to Medicaid and other programs that they're claiming are not going to be cut. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments, but keep it respectful and come to me with facts, not a bunch of woo-hoo-hoo, okay? All right, I'll see you next time, and hopefully my next video will be the one that I plan to air today. May your journeys be filled with joy and blessings, and I'll see you next time.